Good afternoon and welcome to the Big Show. Big Show brought to you by FanDuel Casino every day. We try and do it as much as we can do it every single day during the week. Right about 5 o'clock, obviously, we always like to summarize what's going on in the world of Pittsburgh sports, leading with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I give you many of my thoughts about what we have to talk about, no matter what it is. We're going to be joined a little bit later by Stephen Thompson, who is our Pitt writer. Big game on Saturday with Pitt. They play Notre Dame. And, of course, Notre Dame is one of their rivals. And, of course, it's a big game. And Game Day Live and all that stuff is coming. We'll talk about all that stuff with Stephen Thompson. But we'll get to that later. First up, obviously, is the Steelers. Let's talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers and what they basically have to do, and also what's coming up with the Bengals. But first up, it's a topic that is as old as, well, it seems like the Steelers, but it's not. It's as old as, say, 2007 or 8, 7, whatever, 7, I think, whatever year it was that Mike Tomlin became the head coach. So let's say 2007. And that is, how much of the blame for what's going on with the Steelers does he deserve? Now, I've had a lot of fun with this. I've actually coined the phrase Teflon Tomlin because he's the only coach in America who has full control of just about everything that goes on in with his team. And yet, he never seems to get blamed for anything. I don't understand it. It's always somebody else's fault. And I've heard it all. Well, it's Todd Haley's fault that Ben's unhappy. And if Ben was happy, the offense would be better. So they got rid of Todd Haley and they brought in Ben's buddy, Randy Fichtner, who was terrible. Not terrible, but he just wasn't that good. He was a good quarterbacks coach who probably shouldn't have been an offensive coordinator. Then you've got, Randy Fichtner gets blamed for everything, and they fire him and they bring in Matt Canada. And guess what? He became the problem with everything for the Steelers for forever. Okay, well then he goes. Now all of a sudden, you have Arthur Smith. On the flip side of the ball, you had basically, before Teryl Austin, it was Keith Butler. They got rid of Dick LeBeau. It was Kevin Colbert was the problem because he wasn't drafting right. You can go on and on and on and on. It's always somebody else. For a while, it was Ben. Then it became, well, the quarterbacks aren't that good. Then it was, Kevin Colbert wanted Kenny Pickett, as if Mike Tomlin didn't want Kenny Pickett. At some point, as I've said many, many times, because the new thing is, well, it's not Mike Tomlin's fault that the guys are missing tackles. Not Mike Tomlin's fault that the guys are dropping interceptions. Not Mike Tomlin's fault that they're failing to execute simple things. But here's the bottom line. At some point, the buck has to stop with Mike Tomlin. At some point. I don't want to hear all of these different explanations as to why it's somebody else's fault anymore. It's ridiculous. And there's a group of people who act like if you criticize Mike Tomlin, you're miserable and you hate the Steelers and all the other stuff. At the end of the day, the reality is there has been one constant with this organization throughout the last decade, of which the last 8 years, they haven't won a playoff game. There's been one constant. Well, let me go back. There's probably a few assistant coaches we can point to that seem like they've been around for a long, long time. And, okay, so they're a part of it too. But for the most part, there's been a ton. But let's face it, they're not the ones we're blaming here. They're not the ones that should get any of the blame. you've had, among all of the power brokers and decision makers and key players, right? It's one of those things where there's only been one constant. You've had different coordinators, as if we, as if we haven't pointed that out. Different coordinators on both sides of the ball, multiple times. We've had different quarterbacks, multiple times. We've had different general managers, multiple times. We've had, countless different assistant coaches that have come and gone, multiple times. We've recycled at least two different cycles of draft picks we've gone through. Multiple times, multiple new players. And at the end of the day, when you look at this team, whether they reel off their next 6 or 7 in a row or not, let's say, what are they, 7 games left or 8 games? Actually, 8 games left. If my math is correct, they're 5-4. That's 9 games, 17. So they got 8 games left. Let's say they run off 8 wins in a row and look incredible doing it. You know who should get the credit for that? Mike Tomlin. Period. But you can't have it both ways, and there's so many people that want to have it both ways. The same crowd that is always out there telling us about never having a losing season and be careful what you wish for and he'd have a job in 30 seconds, that same group, when things go wrong, they don't want to blame him. It's everybody else. You can't have it both ways. If he gets credit for the sustained success of not having losing seasons and he gets credit for those kinds of things, guess what? He needs to be in a place where he also gets the blame when things don't go well. Period. Because if he's not going to get the blame, then guess what? You're going to have a situation of where, you're just basically not dealing in reality. So I don't know if this team is going to skid. I don't know if they're going to fall apart. I don't know if they're going to, whatever. But it's going to be interesting to me when you look at it, okay? It's going to be interesting to me to see what happens if they have a little bit of a skid and they don't play well down the stretch. Because there's some people that really, truly do not want to blame Mike Tomlin for any of it. They don't. They want to blame everybody else. And I think that's a problem. It really is. So I feel like, to me, we look at these things, okay, and we look at them from a standpoint of, these are different aspects of the Steelers. If they win, and you want to give credit to Mike Tomlin, then when they lose, you probably can't or shouldn't or won't. I mean, so it's one of these things where, I look at it from the standpoint of it's either Mike Tomlin or not. Can't be both. And when Mike Tomlin's running well, when the Steelers are running well, I give him lots of credit. That's why all this thing of like, oh, well, you're just a negative yins or media guy. I'm not. I'm realistic. And being realistic in this climate that we have when it comes to sports is never a good thing. Actually, being realistic when it comes to, politics and everything else in this era where everything has to be way over the top takes, it's a problem, but not for me. Not for me. My thing is, Mike Tomlin, I'll give you a great example. Yesterday, there was some, these Mike Tomlin fanboys on social media going on and on and on about it's the Mike Tomlin effect is why we're able to get a guy like Asante Samuel. Okay, well, that's great. But you know what? The Mike Tomlin effect has also led to signing a bunch of guys over the course of the last 3 or 4 years that aren't good enough. That's a part of it too. Because he gets enamored with things like resumes. He gets enamored with names. He gets enamored with certain things, and I think sometimes to his own detriment. But to me, Sunday's game was Aaron Rodgers was a big, big part of it. The offensive line was a big, big part of it, right? That's the way it is. But it's funny. The last week when they played the Colts, it was, Mike Tomlin, his brilliance on defense, and his brilliant defense is why they won. Of course, the week before, it's because their defense stunk, and, Teryl Austin needs fired, and, of course, they can't cover anybody. They can't go do this. They can't do that, blah, blah, blah. It's not, Mike Tomlin's not out there on the field. The week before that against the Bengals, Teryl Austin's the worst. Can't have it both ways. That's all I always say. You can't have it both ways. And there's a lot of people who want it both ways on both sides of the equation. But to me, I look at it like this. This week it was, like I said, Rodgers. 2 weeks ago was the defense. 3 weeks ago it was, probably some combination of Teryl Austin, the defense, and Mike Tomlin. The week, when they lost to Seattle, right? It was probably because of the offensive line. And so, but there's one constant in every one of those losses. There's one constant. There's one constant in all 8 of the years that they haven't won a playoff game. Period. There's one constant. And I think that, if you look at it from that standpoint, yes, if there's going to be some sort of a referendum, so to speak, on the Steelers, well, it starts with a referendum on the coach, good or bad. Good or bad. I think one thing that we're starting to see, which I think is a good development, is that we are starting to see a situation of where a lot of guys in the national media are starting to come around to the idea that maybe they've overrated Mike Tomlin's last 7 or 8 years. And that's a good thing because, again, they tell the truth. When you look at it, when they tell the truth, I mean, that's when maybe narratives start to change a little bit. And I'll say this, too. I think, honestly, there's a lot of reason to believe that the Steelers will turn this around and be okay. I think the defense has played well the last 2 weeks. I think it's been more aggressive the last 2 weeks. I think they're going to be, a unit that's going to make things happen pretty much every week now going forward. Like, I don't expect Joe Flacco to go up and down the field this time like he did. Period. Like, I don't expect the Steelers to shut out the Bengals, but I also don't expect the Bengals to go crazy like they did last time. I think the Steelers will have a good plan. They'll make it so that they have their defense has a chance. I mean, their offense has a chance to win the game. If it turns into, a track meet, that's not good. If it turns into a track meet, that probably doesn't do very well for the Steelers because I don't know that their offense can keep up like that. But I don't expect that to happen. I think the defense is going to do really, really well and get stops and be able to slow down the Bengals enough that we don't have to sit here and talk about it, next week, them getting torched again by Flacco. No, again, it could happen. It really could, but I don't think it will. My concerns with the Steelers, though, are all on the offensive side of the ball. All of them. And I know that sounds like, you didn't watch the Packers game or you didn't watch the Bengals game last time or whatever. No, I think the defense will be fine. I think the last 2 weeks they've started to play more aggressively. We've started to see their stars actually make plays. We've started to see, different things that would suggest that they're changing up coverages a little bit and actually scheming a little bit and maybe actually even game planning a little bit on defense. Those are not my concerns. I think the defense will play well enough to give them a chance to win. My question is, the offense good enough? And is 40, whatever he is, I think 42, soon to be 42-year-old Aaron Rodgers, now that it's going to be cold out, they got games outdoors, He gets a few hits. Is he going to look like he did the other night when it was actually warm because they were in a climate-controlled place out in Los Angeles? What's going to happen this Sunday if it's cold out and windy and all that other stuff and he gets knocked around a little bit? Is he going to have that look like he had Sunday night, which is more like, why am I doing this? I should be on the beach, or I should be in a tent somewhere meditating, or whatever the hell he does for fun. My point is, that's a question to me. Also, you're that old, you get a little bit of an injury, you get banged up. It doesn't heal like it does when you're 22. So there's a lot of questions about the Steelers offense, to me, that need to be answered, and we will begin to answer them. But make no mistake, regardless of how this season plays out, they win their last 8, they lose their last 8, they lose 5 and have their first, never losing season thing is over or whatever. Doesn't matter. However it plays out, a lot of it is on Mike Tomlin because the buck stops with him. It drives me crazy again. Guys don't make plays. Well, guess what? Guys don't make plays in one game. Okay, it's one. But if they don't make plays over 6 or 7 games, I mean, I don't know what you want me to tell you. The best coach teams, they seem to make plays. Speaking of which, let's go to our good friend Stephen Thompson from the Post-Gazette, who has the privilege of covering the Pitt Panthers, your Pitt Panthers, by the way. Steve, you are actually getting ready for a really, really big game this Saturday, aren't you?
Yeah, I sure am. Probably the biggest in at least 4 years. I would argue even bigger than that. I mean, 4 years ago when they hosted Clemson at Acrisure Stadium, wasn't quite, college football playoff stakes. This is a lot more real. The 12-team playoff has opened up an opportunity for Pitt, and Notre Dame's in the thick of that race too. So easily the highest stakes Pitt game that I've covered and that I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, I think what's funny to me is it's one of those things where the head coach seems to be the only guy that doesn't know it's a big game. I think it's, again, I've been around Pat Narduzzi for a long, long time, and you kind of have to figure out how to read between lines and all that other stuff. But you have to admit, especially if you just read that quote, it's probably one that you'd like to have back and maybe say a little differently, correct?
Yeah, I would agree. Even if those of us who are kind of around him every day know what he meant, or maybe what he wanted to say, this is just kind of who Pat is. Sometimes, he's talking off of the cuff and things come out wrong. I think the people who would probably be most upset with Pat are the people in the Pitt ticket office. I think before your biggest game of the year, you don't want to be downplaying it. You want this to feel like a big game. If you're Pitt, you want to promote this, you want to promote the stage and everything like that. I understand the coach wanting to, say not make it any bigger than it is. But Pat has, I think, an obligation to also. It was also just funny because, when I talked to him after the Stanford game, I asked him about, the gauntlet that he and his team are going to run at the end of this year. And, he called it a big game. He said he was really excited to coach in it. He was excited to see what his team did in it. So I just thought it was an interesting kind of shift in tone on Monday. And, I don't think his players are necessarily, buying into that. I'm sure he said something different to them in the meeting room and in the locker room. But it overall was just a little bit odd. And I think, from a PR standpoint, it wasn't the cleanest execution on his part.
Right, and do you think it was a thing of where he was trying to downplay it a little bit, just to basically say that, he was, there's sometimes these coaches want to try and take a little bit of pressure off their players, which I always think is silly. You know what I mean? But it doesn't make sense to me, basically.
Yeah, I do think he was trying to take some of the pressure off of his players a little bit. If I was him, I would have said, something along the lines of, seasoned with this game, right? Even if they lose, and yeah, I wouldn't have said that part, I guess. But, even if they lose, right, you still have a path to your ultimate goal, the college football playoff, via the ACC championship game. It gets a little, but, I think that's what he was trying to say. He's not, when he says one game at a time, let's go 1-0 every week or something like that. I think that also includes not, making one game, the game that you are playing now, bigger than it is. I think he is also trying to normalize the stakes a little bit and trying to remind his players that they belong here, right? Like that they have earned this stage. Notre Dame's come to Pittsburgh plenty of times, but College game day hasn't followed them. The fact that Pitt has won 5 in a row and that they are ranked and that they are in position to reach the heights that they want to, or reach the places that they can. That's different. And so I think he wants his kids to feel like, they belong here and that this game is not necessarily bigger just because there's a few more eyeballs on it, or because or that somehow this is abnormal for a spot for Pitt to be in. He wants them to, I guess, feel a little bit more comfortable playing in this game, I would say.
I saw where, you kind of tried to break down the tiebreaker for the ACC. It sounds like and you can correct me or you can actually add some context or whatever, but it sounds like their easiest path is SMU loses to Louisville and Pitt wins out, and do they control their own destiny if SMU loses a game? Is that what I read?
I believe they don't own a bunch of key tiebreakers over Virginia. So I think they would also need one more Virginia loss, but I think people are focusing on that a little bit less because Virginia lost not only the game to Wake Forest, but also their starting quarterback in the process. So it is hard to imagine them beating Duke and I forget who their other Virginia Tech. They got to go on the road to Virginia Tech, who they almost never beat. So I think SMU losing is part of that equation. To be honest, I have not checked up on this since I believe maybe when games were happening Sunday. I know everything kind of broke their way that they needed on last Saturday, but SMU, they do need to go down. I believe Georgia Tech and Duke are the only ones that they may either hold tiebreakers over or have the opportunity to break ties with them in season. It's a real mess. But I know Virginia and SMU are the ones that hold the first couple of tiebreakers, which are I believe winning percentage of conference opponents and record against common opponents. It's real screwed up that Virginia NC State game did not count as a conference game because Pitt beat NC State, Virginia loses to NC State, and that's that would have been an easy way for Pitt to kind of pull ahead of them and in terms of the tiebreakers. And nope, just because of a scheduling quirk, it doesn't work out that way.
I think what's interesting, Steve, is I was actually looking at the remaining schedule. I actually came up a way where literally there could be like an 8-way tie with 2 losses. If the right certain things happen, right? Yeah. I think one of the scenarios would be Pitt beats Georgia Tech, then loses to Miami. That would actually knock them out because they would that would be their second conference loss too. Yeah. So Pitt, Pitt beats Duke. I think they would have to maybe beat Virginia and lose to Virginia Tech or whatever their schedule. But I came up with a scenario. It would be absolutely silly. But here's what I was getting at. There's a scenario where Pitt could win out and not be in the ACC championship game. But if they win out at 10-2 and they close the season with a win over Notre Dame, then a win over Georgia Tech, and a win over Miami, they have to be in the conversation, at least in the conversation for an at-large bid, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because that's where people are some people are projecting Miami will be, right? Like everyone's saying that Miami with 2 losses and a win over Notre Dame and win over Pitt, and I forget who else is on their schedule. But if they win out in that sense, they would be the resume between them and Pitt would look pretty similar. And people think they have a better chance of making it into the field as an at-large team versus champion of the ACC. Some are even saying that they could possibly leapfrog the ACC champion if it ends up being, Duke or whoever, if there's a low-ranked team who ends up winning the conference title. So, yeah, absolutely. I think Pitt would be in the conversation. And the only thing I think you have to worry about is that Notre Dame win, I don't think would depreciate over these last few weeks of the season. But those Georgia Tech wins, Miami wins, if you do pull them out and if you're Pitt, those would probably depreciate because the college football playoff rankings, the committee clearly does not have a ton of respect for the ACC. Even though they bumped up Miami and Georgia Tech a little bit, how would those teams look with a loss to Pitt, at the end of the year? And then, you got Georgia Tech playing Georgia. Like, I don't know if they're going to look especially good and even win that game. Miami, if they lose to Pitt at the end of the year with 3 losses, are people going to really respect their resume? So I think that's your one concern is just at the end of the year, assuming that you are able to hand Georgia Tech and Miami another loss. I don't know. It gets a little bit dicey in that sense because it's not just happening in a vacuum. Those teams are going to take some knocks as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting. It's all going to obviously play out on the field, which is why I don't get too caught up in the rankings right now. As for Pitt Notre Dame started out not very good, although they had a pretty tough schedule to start. One of the biggest things was their defense stunk at the beginning of the year, at least was getting killed. It seems like they've fixed that a little bit, and their defense is better. I mean, you obviously have spent, the last few days looking at Notre Dame. Do you agree with me on that?
Yeah, I think the schedule certainly did help. Tying down USC like they did. I mean, USC with Lincoln Riley, that's always going to be a pretty potent offense. My impression of them is that they are not as strong up front as they have been in recent years. That doesn't mean they're bad, but last year, one of their strengths, especially on defense, was how physical they were up front and how talented and deep they were up front. They had a ton of injuries leading into the playoff, but were really able to hold their own. The thing is, the defense of Notre Dame, I don't know. That's not where my focus is. I have yet to see Cade Bell coach in a game at Pitt, and I don't see receivers running wide open. I think there are going to be plays for Pitt to make on the offensive end, and Pitt has plenty of playmakers capable of doing that as long as Mason Heinschel can put the ball in the right people's hands. So I like Pitt's skill position guys. It'll be interesting to see if Jeff Percy, the starting left tackle, who's been out for a few weeks, if he can come back for this game, because I think that's when you really start to feel comfortable about Pitt putting up points. But to me, this game's going to be decided, on the defensive side for Pitt, when Notre Dame has the ball.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the big thing. I think one of the things that people are wondering, and it's true, I mean, I think it's a fair question. Pitt is on a 5-game winning streak, and if you look, the 5 teams they played are 5 of the 6 worst teams in the ACC. So I'm excited for this game, mostly because I have no idea how good Pitt really is. And I think, if they go out and they play well in this game, it probably goes a long way to answering that question now, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, to be honest, I think a lot of people are asking the same question about Notre Dame, right? They have a pretty good strength of schedule, but it's buoyed by those games against Miami and Texas A&M at the beginning of the year. Their schedule hasn't exactly been a gauntlet either. So I think both teams really have a lot to prove in this game. I mean, Pitt certainly, because they don't have the attachment, they don't have the benefit of a national brand like Notre Dame does. I think committee voters are more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt because they have the logo and the gold helmets. But yeah, Pitt has a chance here with this stage, with a lot of people watching, to, announce themselves a little bit, right? Like, this is an opportunity that this program hasn't had in a long time. And I think to do it, if you're able to do it with a freshman quarterback as well, all of a sudden you've created a superstar there, right? You've created a household name. And so, in a sport, in an industry that has that puts a lot of weight on perception, that's just what college sports are. Your name is about as valuable as any win that you get. If Pitt is able to announce themselves on this stage, if they are able to win this game, there is a ripple effect throughout recruiting and through the rankings and just through how people view Pitt. That's going to pay dividends on and on and on. Not to mention the kind of money that they could bring in from this game. There should be an interesting story in the Post-Gazette sometime this week from my partner Abby Schnabel about that.
Well, we are obviously sponsored by FanDuel, so let me just say real quickly, you go to your FanDuel app. If you want to bet on anything, you can do it, and you can download the FanDuel app, bet on a bunch of games. The odds on this game are a little surprising to me. If you go to your FanDuel app right now, the last I saw, Notre Dame is a 12.5-point favorite and it's at Pitt. There's a lot of other ways you can bet. You can bet on different prop bets and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is Notre Dame is favored by 12.5 points. Last one for you, Stephen. Did that shock you when you saw that line? It started, I think, at 11.5. It's now 12.5, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it shocked me. That kind of makes sense given, who these teams are and where they're coming from. That said, I think Pitt's going to be much more competitive than 12.5 points. That's the number you get. I would feel pretty comfortable taking it.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of points. Stephen, I thank you so much for joining us and jumping on. And great job as always. Continue to cover the Panthers. Next time we have you on, we can talk a little bit about the basketball team. But considering that they've played 3 games that I don't know. Early in the season, I have no idea what to make of Pitt. And I know they played West Virginia. I guess we should talk about that real quick. Tomorrow they play West Virginia. I think West Virginia is very similar to them, and I don't know that we know how good they are either. But it's a good test, the backyard brawl down at West Virginia. Be a nice win for them, wouldn't it?
It sure would. Just, for morale, I guess. I don't think, it's a good test for, I think, the big guys, right? We'll see how this Pitt front court, Roman Siwalepa, Papa Conte, Cam Corn, how do they stack up against, some more light competition? I'm interested to see it. Should be a fun game. Should be a good atmosphere. But I don't know how much it'll say about what this team does the rest of the year.
All right, Stephen. Thank you so much, my man.
Thanks.
All right, brother. There's Stephen Thompson of the Post-Gazette. Tomorrow will be Adam Bittner and I will put together, our Steelers stuff, and we'll do a lot of good stuff for the weekend about all these things, Steelers, Pitt, anything else that comes up. So, and then of course, Adam and I will be on after the game on let's see, I guess it would be Sunday at 1:00, right? Yes. All right. We'll see you. We'll see you. Let's try it again.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.